Hey there, welcome to That Dang Dad. My name is Phil, and tonight I want to address a bit of criticism I received on my latest video answering questions about police and prison abolition. In the video, I was addressing a concern people had that even if everyone's material needs were fully met at all times without shame, there might still be, say, serial killers or other people with antisocial issues that harm members of the community. That said, a few of you theorize that even in post-scarcity, fully automated luxury communism, it's likely that at least a few people might have antisocial tendencies that just can't fully be managed with medicine and mental health care. I acknowledge for the good of the community, we have to address bad actors in our midst. If social work and mental health care for some reason fail to mitigate those bad behaviors, it may be necessary to house those people away from the community. My friend Fern commented that this made her a little uncomfortable because it sounded like I was implying that we simply trade prison for psychiatry, and that, from her perspective, the medical and mental health models informing modern psychiatry are just as lousy with ableism, white supremacy, and the criminalization of poverty that modern prisons are. That in fact prisons and modern psychiatry are animated by the same energies. Remember how I said this? So one other answer for what do we do in the meantime is to ask those folks. Find out what they need. Find out what resources they're lacking. Find out what state and local agencies are failing them. Find out which politicians are targeting them. And just let them lead that conversation and write our prescriptions. Well, sounds like it's time for me to do just that. Anyway, my friend sent me some links and videos, and I have to admit, they were pretty challenging for me. Not because the arguments were hard to understand, but because I and several of my family members have benefited from aspects of the mental health system, up to and including some extended hospital stays. Ending the stigma around mental health and advocating for mental health to be taken seriously as an essential part of healthcare are really important to me. So it was kind of a shock to have someone say, abolition should include the modern mental health industry too. But as shocking as it was, I can't deny the logic. For example, Lee Ida Harris compared jails to mental hospitals and found a lot of overlap. Black, indigenous, and people of color are disproportionately overrepresented in both. Both disregard the rights and safety of trans and non-binary people. Both involve law enforcement response and transport. Both make use of solitary confinement and seclusion in cells. Both can involve forced medications. Both involve physical restraints. And in both places, people with medical complaints are often not believed and sometimes die as a result. So, those of us committed to preserving the agency and dignity of all people should find many of the same outrages in the psychiatric system that we see in the prison systems. But it goes even deeper than that. According to many of the psychiatric abolitionists I read this week, the entire history of the psychiatric system is rotten with ableism, classism, racism, and other axes of oppression. In a paper published in the British Medical Journal, Patrick Bracken and Philip Thomas discuss how the Enlightenment-era thinking that gave us modern psychology was obsessed with the individual and purposefully excluded societal and structural contexts from its evaluation of individual health and well-being. Bracken and Thomas argue that reducing madness to a purely biological event that happens exclusively inside one person's body misses the ways that our environment and the society we live in are inextricably linked to our mental states and how we interact with the world. This, in turn, causes us to pathologize rational responses to a violent, oppressive society. As a grim example of this, Stella Akuamensa discusses the quote-unquote mental illness known as drapetomania. This was a quote-unquote disease discovered by doctors in the 1850s. Want to guess what the symptoms are? Drapetomania manifests as slaves becoming alienated, depressed, disobedient, and running away from their plantations. Fortunately, there's a treatment for this disease. According to some jagoff called Dr. Samuel Cartwright, If treated kindly, well fed and clothed, with fuel enough to keep a small fire burning all night, separated into families, each family having its own house, not permitted to run about at night to visit their neighbors, to receive visits or use intoxicating liquors, and not overworked or exposed too much to the weather, they are very easily governed, more so than any other people in the world. When all this is done, if any of them at any time are inclined to raise their heads as high as their master or overseer, humanity and their own good require that they should be punished until they fall into that submissive state which was intended for them. They have only to be kept in that state and treated like children, with care, kindness, attention, and humanity, to prevent and cure them from running away. Psychiatric abolitionists argue that just because slavery was abolished does not mean that guardians of the status quo have stopped trying to make diseases out of deviation from the power structures of the day. Researcher Robert Roth noted how historically it's been very easy to institutionalize women and very difficult for those women to prove their sanity. He remarks, "Dynamics of power and status affect all mentally ill people, and behavior is often a consequence of limited social opportunity." Activist Stephanie Kaufman recalls an expose penned by Nellie Bly in which she infiltrated an insane asylum in the 1880s. One of the people she interviewed was a woman who had been committed for essentially being stressed out from overwork. Her doctors were convinced something inside her brain was broken and refused to listen to her, constantly telling her she was mentally ill and just generally wearing down her view of her own sanity. Nellie Bly puts it like this: "What accepting torture would produce insanity quicker than this treatment? I would like the expert physicians to take a perfectly sane and healthy woman, shut her up and make her sit from 6 a.m. until 8 p.m. on straight back benches, do not allow her to talk or move during these hours, give her no reading, let her know nothing of the world or its doings, give her bad food and harsh treatment, and see how long it will take to make her insane." Think about that for a second and then pair it with an excerpt from T.H. Lerman's paper, Social Defeat and the Culture of Chronicity, in which they write the following: "Sophisticated studies are now beginning to show that schizophrenia is associated with the social class of one's father, and presumably then, of one's birth, the risk increasing as the class declines. It is associated as well with urban dwelling. The risk increases with what is called ethnic density. The incidence of schizophrenia among non-white people rises as their presence in their neighborhood begins to fall. If your skin is dark, your risk for schizophrenia rises as your neighborhood whitens, whether you live in the United States or in London. Most strikingly, the risk of schizophrenia for immigrants to the United Kingdom rises sharply, an effect that has now been shown in so many papers by so many researchers with such methodological care that it cannot be explained away by clinicians' racial bias." When I read these statements, here's how I synthesize it in my head. It sure seems like the further away you are from the dominant class, race, gender, and body situation, the more likely it is that your responses to oppression will be classified as a mental illness, and the more likely you are to lose your agency inside the mental health system. That seems bad, folks. So, in that context, I can see how the language I was using in my previous video could be concerning for some people and maybe even triggering. I did make it seem like prison's bad, psych hospital's good, in a way that obscures a lot of what we just discussed above. And for the record, I don't dispute any of the above facts and history regarding the psychiatric industrial complex. And my vision for a post-prison world does not involve shoving people into padded cages instead of metal cages and calling that liberation. When I spoke of mental health care, I was trying to speak in a general sense, trying to encompass an entire lattice of community agencies, social activities, and medical treatments. But those of you who pushed back against that broad brush are correct. We have to be specific when we talk about care, because right now, today, mental health care can be just as oppressive as prisons. Here's Stella Akua-Mensah again with her vision of a post-psychiatry world. When we think of a post-psychiatric and post-prison world, we see peers walking with each other through suffering and developing empathic skills that foster mutuality. We see transformative justice processes helping us resist shame and punishment, embrace accountability, and dismantle internalized tendencies towards harm and abuse. We see us knowing that our distress is an understandable response to cycles of harm and suffering. We see us spending restful and formative time with loving people in loving spaces when we are in crisis. We see us healing our trauma at our own paces and in our own ways. We see us no longer pathologizing and vilifying beautiful and harmless manifestations of neurodiversity. We see us never, under any circumstances, putting psychiatric drugs into each other's bodies without consent. And perhaps most fundamentally, we see us taking actual care of each other, not paternalizing and imprisoning each other while referring to this violence as care. Those of you wondering about specific, concrete examples of programs that could replace psychiatry should look up activist Elliot Fukui. He talks about organizing teams of people who act as a safety network when members are in crisis. He describes an experience with his own team like this. Aaron stayed with me for 2 weeks and supported the local team, which consisted of 7 people. Our team made sure I ate every day, gave me baths, helped me change my clothes, took me to therapy, prevented me from harming myself or running away. They held me and comforted me when I was in a flashback or a nightmare, and spent the night with me so I would feel safe enough to sleep. Some of the folks on our team had been supporting each other since 2005, even before the plan. For others, it had been just a year or 2. They communicated about what they noticed about my episodes over the years, patterns and triggers they could see, and shared with new team members what worked to calm me down, tricks to get me to eat and sleep when I refused. Folks learn how to care for one another and learn the ways they needed to care for themselves in a difficult moment. After 2 months, I was able to go back to work without having any interaction with the medical industrial complex or the police. Our team enables my thriving. No one has made me feel like a freak or a failure or a waste of time and space. Even when I am my most broken, they stay with me. They guide me back through it. They are my tether. In my previous video, when I said imagine the kind of systems we could design if we weren't trying to cage 2 million people at the same time, this is the kind of thing I was envisioning but didn't have the experience or the words for. Elliot's team was specifically attuned to Elliot's needs, and look how successful it was. Look at how prioritizing safety and dignity prevented Elliot from getting sucked into a deeper vortex of poverty and criminalization. All that said, I have to be honest, I'm still personally wrestling with the idea of blanket psychiatric abolition. I acknowledge and affirm all the above research and life experiences of these activists, but there's a nagging little part of me that doesn't quite believe that there will never be a case where someone needs to be temporarily, non-consensually medicated for their safety and the safety of their community. Or that there will never be cases in which people might need to be temporarily locked inside of a care facility for safety reasons. Or that there won't be a time somebody's safety team is unable to manage their crisis without a more serious intervention. Even so, this research has definitely made me pause when I'm about to say we will do something for your safety, for your own good, because I recognize in that language the language of Dr. Cartwright's prescriptions for drapetomania. I recognize that as a white, cisgendered, not yet disabled guy, the system has been extraordinarily kind to me, and that my responses to the world around me have never been criminalized or used to take away my agency. So, it's extremely likely that my empathy and my imagination are a little atrophied, that many of my intuitions about the world are pretty undercooked. I don't know that I can call myself a psychiatric abolitionist today in the same way that I can confidently call myself a prison abolitionist. However, what I do know is that there are lots of people out there telling me that the psychiatric industrial complex is killing them today, and that means something to me, and I'm going to do some yes-anding of my own. So what do you think? Has the mental health system where you live helped or hurt you, if you feel comfortable sharing? If you have experience inside the system, what do you recommend? Reform or abolition? Let us know in the comments. If you thought this video was a helpful discussion, please like and subscribe, and most importantly, please share it with people. Anyway, thank you to my friend Fern for sending me basically all the links I used to research this video, and for trusting me enough to confront the language and carelessness I was using in my previous video. We're all on a long journey of empathy, and I appreciate people further ahead of me showing me the way. I also appreciate you spending your time with me, and I hope to see you on the next one. Good night.